what gets put into the clinic is something new that patients will ultimately be able to participate in the research in terms of testing, and then ultimately benefit from at scale when new therapeutics and new diagnostics are brought forward through clinical trials successfully.
Welcome to Believe in Progress, the American Association for Cancer Research Foundation podcast. Join us and be inspired by the incredible stories of those who have faced cancer with strength and resilience, and the medical professionals who are working tirelessly to find new treatments and ultimately a cure. Believe in Progress isn't just about the science of cancer. It's about the human side of this disease. Together, we can make progress in the fight against cancer and bring hope to those who need it most. Welcome to Believe in Progress, the AACR Foundation podcast, where we highlight the transformative work being done in the fight against cancer. I'm your host, Mitch Stoller, Chief Philanthropic Officer at the AACR. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Raymond DuBois and Dr. Ryan Schoenfeld from the MUSC Foundation for Cancer Research. Dr. DuBois and Dr. Schoenfeld are leading efforts to accelerate cancer research and bring innovative treatments to patients worldwide. Join us as we explore their inspiring work and the significant impact of the MUSC Foundation on cancer research and patient care. Dr. DuBois and Dr. Schoenfeld, welcome to Believe in Progress. Thank you so much for being here today. Well, Dr. DuBois and Dr. Schoenfeld, Ray and Ryan, welcome so much to Believe in Progress. I'm so excited to have you here for this episode. I know you both quite well, and very excited to talk about the MUSC Foundation today. So welcome to Believe in Progress.
Thanks, Mitch.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mitch.
So Ray, as the executive chairman of the MUSC Foundation, can you share with us the mission of the foundation and your vision for the future impact on cancer research?
Sure. And, it's actually a shared vision amongst the team, and we all sort of have bought into it. Obviously, cancer research is underfunded, we believe now. There's not enough support from the federal agencies and all the conglomerate of other foundations. So it's really important to do whatever we can to increase the support for this research and move the ball forward. We are really focused more on translational research that can bring some basic findings through the process that goes to the clinic. And so that's really our main focus area. But we are not, just studying any one cancer. We support all different types of cancer. Research on different cancers, and we have a global footprint, 13 or 14 countries. So we really do want to take a wide view, and our main purpose, I think, is to fund the very best science we can that will have the biggest impact on the field.
For the audience, perhaps more lay people in the audience, could you just better define translational research for everybody?
Yeah, so research is done sort of in different compartments, and there's a very fundamental basic set of researchers that look at quite very early in the process, and then there's a stage where a discovery is made and we try to move it more towards an application to a clinical problem, and that's what we call translational, is to take the basic discoveries and move them closer to the clinic so that a new drug or a new diagnostic or some sort of clinical tool can be developed that's going to impact the large population.
Thank you. Thanks. Ryan, how did the MUSC Foundation even get started? I think it was pretty interesting story from what I know about it, but I think the audience would like to hear the motivation behind the foundation.
Sure, absolutely. So the MUSC Foundation was started a little over 7 years ago. It's a public charity, but initially it was started by a founding donor, Alex Knaster, whose father was named Mark, and that's who we're named after. About 10 years ago, Mark was diagnosed with late-stage renal cancer and progressed quickly. And while Alex was, going through that time with his father, he became very interested in how he might be able to make an impact philanthropically in this area, and specifically translational research is what came up, looking at that gap that exists between academic discoveries and really what gets translated, what gets put into the clinic is something new that patients will ultimately be able to participate in the research in terms of testing, and then ultimately benefit from at scale when new therapeutics and new diagnostics are brought forward through clinical trials successfully. So translational research is really the place that when Alex saw that how many open scientific questions were still out there, that there was still an opportunity for research funding to make an impact. And, everyone can kind of assume on one level that there's been a lot of cancer research funding, globally speaking, from commercial, from government, from other nonprofit sources. And while that's true, I think this area of translational research, where there's kind of an intersection between disciplines, sometimes, different collaborations may come together across areas. And as academic groups try to kind of traverse what's sometimes called the valley of death, right, between what's happening academically and what might be happening commercially, where most clinical trials ultimately get their funding from. So there's a real opportunity for a research organization to take risks and to look globally for the opportunities to make an impact. And so that's why the Mark Foundation was started. And when we got off the ground 7-ish years ago, we started off, we're still a relatively small team today. We're 9 people. We started off with an even smaller group of people with scientific backgrounds. Really, it's the team internally. We spend most of our time trying to find out what opportunities might be out there globally to make an impact, to find research that we could fund that would meaningfully add to the portfolio of activities that we have ongoing. So we've designed programs to address that. And so the foundation really has had a pretty, we were able to get put together pretty quickly thanks to Alex's philanthropic efforts. And so since we were able to do that, we got a number, we've had a number of programs running for at least a few years now. And so that's really how the foundation got started. But as I mentioned earlier, we are a public nonprofit, and we have other donors who've come on board to help out the Mark Foundation with its mission since we got started 7 years ago.
So, as the CEO, you oversee many of the innovative programs of the Mark Foundation. Could you cite a couple examples of some of the unique things that you're doing that perhaps other peer organizations might not entertain?
Sure. We have a few programs I think that are unique, and even all of our programs, I think we have a unique kind of positioning for our programs. So I'll start with one of those. We have an early career award, and that's in and of itself probably not completely unique. But what makes our award kind of stand out, I think, is that we target a very specific population that's between their 3rd and 8th year of having independence as running their own lab. They have to already have established their lab and have a certain level of funding that we've defined for this award to be eligible. And then the award is it's for the person to grow their lab with, but really specifically, we evaluate them on their idea for something that's new, that's risky, something that's some research that makes sense that it's connected to their lab, and it makes sense that they're the ones doing it, but it represents some sort of high risk, high reward extension or reach from what they've already established successfully in their lab. Because that early stage of their career, that's often when a lot of the most important discoveries get made in the early stages of a scientist's career. But there's also a lot of forces that are kind of arrayed such that scientists are often encouraged to play it safe during those stages while they're trying to build their labs up towards their tenure decision or just trying to get established. So we really wanted to give some money that would have the impact of encouraging that kind of risk.
Do you have an example, a specific example of one of those high risk, high reward applications?
Absolutely. So we've had I think 35 Emerging Leader Award winners over the last 7 years, and they're all fantastic. They kind of span a pretty broad range of projects, from disease focus to platform focus. But I'll give you a couple of examples from our first class. So that in 2019 was the first, early 2019 was the first year that we awarded this. And so one person was at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Sigal Kadosh, received this award. At the time, she was growing her lab. She'd already established some success at that early stage of her career, really studying an important complex that's often mutated across many cancer types. But it's such a complex of multiple different proteins and subunits. It's incredibly intricate how to study this. And our grant, our award helped her kind of really dig into really get kind of focused on this on one aspect of this large complex, and see what she could really learn about that aspect and how that might plug into the larger ecosystem. It's called the BAF complex, and it's really important in terms of epigenetic regulation. And so with this award, helped her kind of expand her lab into that new direction. And as the years progressed, the research came out in some high profile publications, and she went on to receive Howard Hughes investigator status. So that kind of all, it was nice to see those build on each other.
And so your grant really, she was able to really leverage your dollars to do other great things, which is really
absolutely
showing a tremendous impact, right?
Yeah, to take a risk in her lab, basically to go into a new area that was something where she, that was novel, and it really helped her kind of, I think, gave her the space to expand in those new directions.
And Ray, high risk, high reward. So high risk meaning probably many of these won't work, right? Or what's? To me, that's really a great vision on your part and the foundation's part to give people that opportunity. But can you chat a little bit about high risk, high reward?
Sure. We really are going for the reward.
Right.
And you have to accept a certain amount of risk. There's some really what we call like blue collar research where, it's a lot of it's been worked out. You just continue to do a series of experiments along the same track, and you can make an incremental advance. And those are important to solidify certain areas of science. But this is an area that, really hasn't been worked out. And there are some big questions, and we're willing to invest to let that develop a little bit further. And it takes a certain kind of scientist to really go all in and try to do that. But these are the ones that usually advance the field and have the highest impact. So the federal agencies aren't willing, for the most part, to take that risk. The kinds of grants you see going through most of the NIH study sections and some of these other agencies are pretty well developed, and there's a incremental advance that needs to be made in certain specific aims, and then those experiments are proposed, and it's either yes, no, or sometimes it's a pretty good idea that it's going to be a yes in terms of what the results are. For the high risk research, that's an area that just hasn't been worked out as well. Somebody has a hunch but with a rationale, and we're willing to invest in that hunch to really make a bigger discovery.
And Ray, I think it's organizations like Mark Foundation, AACR. These are really important roles for our organizations to be playing. Don't you both think that?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I think it's really important because it really gives us a faster progress. It accelerates the progress. Obviously it's a risk, so it doesn't always work out. But at the rate we're going with the standard sort of NIH grant, it's just going to take too long to make the big impact discoveries. And Ryan, you should weigh in.
I'd love to hear Ryan.
Organizations like AACR and the Mark Foundation, I think it's really important that funding organizations do encourage that risk taking and provide that supplemental. It's more than just supplemental because it goes off in new directions, but provide that funding that goes beyond what's available. It's a large pot of money that it's shrinking sometimes, but it's a large pot of money that the NIH has available for cancer research, and other comparable organizations around the world outside the U.S. To greater and lesser extents have access to those kinds of funding opportunities. But to have foundations that truly encourage, taking a chance, trying something. It's okay if it doesn't work. It's not only about getting a paper. It's not only about getting the next kind of milestone. It's really about trying to answer questions and trying to, and when research, when you try something and you learn something, even if it's not what you set out to learn, I think you can share those insights with the world still in ways that help move the field forward, different fields forward within cancer. So I think it's really important to keep those.
Mitch Stoller is really a great example. She just won the Paul Marks Prize earlier this year. And I think she's destined to really make a huge impact in the field. And so those are the kind of people that we really would like to see, get these types of emerging leader awards.
So much need in cancer research. How do you prioritize research? How do you prioritize what area? I mean, someone in my family had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma B cell, so I want you to be working on that. But how do you all come together and think about that?
Sure. I could start on that.
Please.
So we, because we're an organization that's broadly open to any type of cancers potentially in scope, it's really that's a broad scope, right? So how does a 10-person team focus our efforts globally across the world on different areas? So the way that we do that, there's two approaches. One is a targeted approach where we, by working with our close advisors, we have a scientific advisory committee that meets every so often and provides strategic input to our scientific team internally about what we're always looking about, maybe 1 year out, right, on a rolling basis, thinking about logistically what we're going to be planning next. And we're always thinking about 3 or 4 topics, and we intentionally don't over kind of prescribe what we mean by topics. Sometimes that could be a disease area focus. So for example, in 2022, we had a workshop on pediatric brain tumors. We had some great organizers that came together to help us run that workshop, and then we provided some funding opportunities that came on the other side of that. We are planning a glioblastoma workshop this year, so kind of staying in the brain theme. So those are kind of 2 disease area foci, and what drove those? Obviously, high unmet need. There's a lot of need from a patient perspective for breakthroughs to happen there. There haven't been therapeutic breakthroughs for a very long time in both of those areas. So that's a driving force. But we also look at platforms. We look across, so we focus on diseases, but we also think about areas where, if we're thinking about embracing risk and we're thinking about taking chances, encouraging academic scientists to take more chances, we look into the development of platforms that often are the intersection between disciplines. So one great example of that is in chemical biology, right? Bringing chemists together with biologists. There's lots of different ways you can do that, but one way that we've encouraged that in the past is to have folks come together again for a workshop that we organized around the topic of induced proximity, where a small molecule can be utilized to bring large proteins together into proximity with each other. That technique has been used now clinically to some benefit in terms of degrading proteins, and there's drugs that are coming through. I think you'll see drugs on the market at some point in the next 5 years. But from a conceptual perspective, there's a lot more you could do with that, right? Having a small molecule that can manipulate proteins into proximity with each other. So we just had a kind of a brainstorming think tank kind of workshop with a lot of great chemists and biologists getting together to talk about what are some other things that we could do with this approach as a platform. And then the Mark Foundation funded some research out of that. A number of venture stage companies actually were started based on ideas that were discussed at that meeting. But more excitingly, there were new potential therapeutic modalities that have emerged out of those discussions. And so that could impact multiple tumor types. It could impact blood cancers, could impact solid tumors, can be applied to traditionally difficult to drug targets like transcription factors, could work in rare cancers. So we kind of balance our approach over time, focusing in on diseases where we think there's a high area of unmet need and an opportunity to make an impact now based on what the state of the field, as well as looking at platforms that we think might have, from a innovative technology perspective, as they're developed, could have broad applicability across many types of cancers.
Ray, throughout your esteemed career, your work has significantly advanced our understanding of the role of inflammation in cancer. Can you discuss how your research has influenced current cancer prevention strategies?
Sure. I mean, basically, we got interested in this whole area because there are certain elements in tissues where there's what we call chronic inflammation, and when that goes on unchecked for periods of time, it dramatically increases your risk for cancer. So, obesity is sort of a chronic inflammatory condition. Stress that we all have on a regular basis can induce inflammation. And then, if the pancreas or liver get inflamed, and that stays present for a long time, then there's a much higher likelihood that cancer will develop in those organs. So we've been trying to look at, the interplay between the immune system and the normal tissue and what kind of interactions occur during that inflammatory process that lead to the cancerization process. One example, I think, is that when you use these, what we call anti-inflammatory drugs like aspirin or, ibuprofen or NSAIDs, it checks that inflammation, and in some cases, especially in the GI tract, decreases the risk for cancer. We'd like to find other examples of that we could use to target and intervene. And now there's a lot of rekindling in the whole area of cancer prevention and especially cancer interception to prevent the process from going to a later stage.
How'd you get interested in that? I mean, that part of the cancer journey.
We got interested because of some work that I had been doing when I was at Johns Hopkins in Dan Nathan's lab. We were in the process of cloning all the genes that we could find that were induced early after growth stimulation of fibroblast in culture. So that was a very basic research project. And so the lab cloned hundreds of these genes, and then we started studying them at different levels to try to understand what they were doing. One of the genes that I worked on when I moved my project to Vanderbilt was this cyclooxygenase 2 gene, which is a key enzyme in the production of pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. And so that very basic kind of science led to the discovery of the role of that enzyme in the process in the colon cancer. And then we were able to get drugs that inhibited the enzyme or, perturb it by knocking it out or overexpressing it, and found that it really does modulate the immune system and makes the tumor microenvironment much more resistant to attack by immune cells that kill the tumor. So that's a good example of going all the way from a very, very basic activity to something that, has some clinical relevance.
And Ry, you have a rich background in data science and also medicinal chemistry. What are some of the most promising developments you see in these fields? And is that something that did you bring that experience to the Mark Foundation as well? And or is the Mark Foundation dealing with some of those areas?
Sure. Yeah, I think that interdisciplinary background that I had personally, kind of starting off as a medicinal chemist and then moving into chemical biology and then later into data science, was a good fit for what we were doing at the foundation to get off the ground. So that was sort of a mutual fit. The fact that the foundation was open to looking at those kind of interdisciplinary areas, and that I had a background in it, so it was a good mutual fit. In terms of what I'm excited, I mean, there's so much I'm excited about from a data science perspective. There's so much. I mean, there's a lot of noise these days, so I think kind of finding the signal in that noise can be challenging. But there is still a lot of promise and a lot of signal there too. So I think some of the areas that I'm the most excited about, where structural biology is enabled by AI, right? So last week there was the AlphaFold 3 paper came out from DeepMind. Everybody's pretty excited about it now. Some of the shortcomings in the AlphaFold 2 model have been addressed, and this is probably the best platform to model protein-ligand interactions, to model protein-protein interactions now, protein-nucleic acid interactions. So it's incredibly powerful.
And right, let me ask you a question. Is this something that AI uncovered?
It's a new, I mean, it's an old problem, and there were a lot of, I would say, first principles based, physics principles based approaches to these, that some of which worked pretty well. But AI and kind of the adoption of large language models and other technologies that came out of the field of AI enabled what I would call a different tool set to be applied to an old problem. And I think it turned, so it looks like it's better. It looks like, and I wasn't at AlphaFold 2, I was saying certainly the volume was there. You could generate a lot of structures quickly, which was great and something that was hard to do before. But now it looks like, I mean, it's still early. It's only been a week since it was out or so, or a week and a half, but it looks like this platform to model protein ligand interactions is something that could potentially be game changing. Yeah, so there were older platforms that did that pretty well, but the fact that this is doing it with a different approach, as good or probably better than, and I think the scalability is going to be there, where you can now iterate through design cycles and ideas much faster, and come up. It's almost certainly going to lead to faster therapeutic discovery, among other things.
And Ray, at the AACR annual meeting, a lot of noise about data science and artificial intelligence. What's your position? What do you think about it?
Well, it can be quite powerful. I mean, in a lot of ways, these algorithms recognize patterns really well. And so, like looking, the old timey cloning that we did, looking for that needle in the haystack took, years, months to complete. This can do it if it has the right database in a pretty quick, short time period. Also, they're utilizing AI now to screen for new drugs for some of these targets that proteins that are coming out. And, some of that looks pretty, there are examples where it's found a lead, in a matter of minutes that would take a lot longer just doing it, in the lab using standard assays. So I think it's got promise. It's too early to tell. There's a lot of hype about it now. And clearly there's a lot of concern, ethical and moral concerns people are talking about. But I think that our data sets are getting bigger, and the more ways we can find to mine that data, we're probably going to make progress a lot faster.
I'm really interested in mentorship and the role of mentorship. Clearly at AACR, it's a big topic here, but I'd love to hear from both of you about mentors that were really important to your careers, and if you're willing to spend a couple minutes chatting about that, and perhaps your thoughts about how important mentorship is to that. The many of the people that we give grants to, those early career scientists that are moving up the ladder. So Ryan, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure. I can think of two. I mean, I've had many mentors, but I could think of two in particular that shaped my career. I mean, one, my undergraduate organic chemistry professor. I wasn't sure what I wanted to study. I kind of moved majors a couple times, studied physics and math and engineering, and I somehow took an organic chemistry class, and I loved it so much. And then I met a fellow named Jan Simek, who was a research who kind of taught me about what chemistry research was about. I happened to be at a school that was more engineering focused and did not have a lot of scientific research. So I didn't really have a lot of role models like graduate students and whatnot around to look and see what that world was like. And so Jan was able to help me understand what that world meant, help me apply for like summer research opportunities, and really that got me started as a scientist. Initially as an organic chemist, but that's led me to here. And then another person along the way who was, when I worked for, 15 years in industry and pharma, so most of it at Roche, some of it at J&J. I learned a lot from a leadership perspective. So I had one person I worked for, her name was Karen Lackey, and she taught me just a lot as a role model about what leadership means, what taking responsibility means, what strategy means, like what is a strategy and what's not. People throw that word around lightly, but what does that really mean? And how does that apply specifically to what you're doing or what your team is doing or what your company's doing or what your department's doing? So that was those were two people that had a big
how
impact.
important were those relationships though, and to I guess bringing you to where you are today? Because you talk about leadership, you're in a leadership role right now. You have to manage people.
Incredibly important. So I wouldn't have been I wouldn't have had a scientific career without Jan Simek, and I would not have the kind of leadership roles that I've been able to take on since I worked for Karen. It's about confidence, honestly. So part of being a leader is, it's not just about you could be confident without the right substance, and I think things could go in bad directions. But, having confidence that, you understand what a strategy is, you understand when it's okay not to know everything too. That's another tough one for a leader to figure out what the right level
Right.
is. You have to kind of get up to in terms of subject matter expertise. All that stuff I wouldn't be in this position today without those two mentors.
Ray?
Sure, and actually, it's interesting. There's two people that I think probably had a big impact on my career. One was a mentor that I had when I was working on my PhD at UT Southwestern, who also I worked with when I was in medical school, University of Texas Medical School. So he was primarily a liver doc, and he was primarily interested in selenoproteins, what their roles were in biology. And so he was doing some very basic science, isolating and characterizing these selenoproteins. And so at an early stage, I got involved in that, which led to a project that we did in collaboration with Teresa Stotman at the NIH. She was in the biochemistry group there. She had discovered several yeast selenoproteins and had worked out mechanisms for purifying those. So I went there for 3 months, and we actually purified a selenoprotein during that time period with the help of a very able postdoc who was also in the lab, Mark Slikowski, who then became famous at Genentech. But that was a very important time because after I left my training in Texas, I went to Hopkins for clinical training. And after clinical training, I got a postdoc in Dan Nathan's laboratory. And one of the first questions he asked me when he interviewed me was, can you give me any references or people that you've worked with that could recommend you for this role? And turns out he was very good friends with Teresa Stotman at the NIH. And luckily, she gave me a great recommendation. So, I got a chance to do a postdoc with Dan, and it was really eye-opening. I mean, he was all science all the time and taught people, the ins and outs of how to design an experiment, how to interpret the data, and ultimately how to present that in a way people could understand it. The fact that he won the Nobel Prize was sort of an added touch because he could share that with everybody in the lab.
Do you both think this is an area that we're not paying enough attention to as far as mentoring, again, this next generation of scientists?
Well, I think seems like to me there's less time to do that than there used to be. There's so many, electronic, things that we're doing that take a lot of time and effort, and we're trying to do a number of things that take away from our time to spend with our students and postdocs. So I think it's more difficult now just to get that, time to sit down and talk about, how do you set up a network, how you sort of interact with people to let them know what you're doing and why you think it's important. That leads to those other jobs and opportunities.
What do you think, Ray?
I think also, I mean, it's just it's a variation of what Ray was saying about time, but I think as time has gone on, and I think is maybe even more acutely in the last 5 or 6 years with, remote options for classrooms and things like that. I think, prioritizing and placing value on teaching pedagogical skills to people who are coming up with their degrees and through their graduate school and postgraduate experience or even undergraduate experience. I think those very skills that often are not the skills that you need to have to get papers published or to get successful grant applications, which are two traits that are often get selected for, I think, in an academic setting. Selecting for the ability of people who have really highly skilled at teaching, right? Teaching is really mentoring. A big part of mentoring is teaching. And so, and I think I think we've probably, we've lost a little bit of that over the the last couple of decades for various reasons. But I think that's, I'd love to see that, an emphasis on teaching as a skill, come back. Whether you become a teacher or not, everyone has an opportunity to be a teacher in some way to someone. So prioritizing that skill set, I think, is something I'd like to see more of.
One thing that I know we pride ourselves on here at AACR, and I think the Mark Foundation's the same, is interdisciplinary collaborations. And I think that's something you stress, and I'd love to hear more about your emphasis and focus on that and why you think that's so important.
Some people call this like convergence of different areas of science and, hard science versus biology and medicine, and I think the idea of bringing those together, and hopefully Ryan will give an example of what we've done at the Johns Hopkins Center in Baltimore. But, that really leads to new ways to look at old data, new ways to interpret things in a different light. that could lead to those leaps and bounds going forward where you can accelerate the progress. So I'll let Ryan describe the Hopkins Center.
Sure. Sure. So Ray's mentioning one of our set. We have a few Mark Foundation centers that we've established over the first 7 years, and one of them is at Johns Hopkins, and it's a center that's focusing on genomics and imaging, and it's interdisciplinary in that there's a connection between machine learning, data science, pathology, and single cell analysis and immunology. So the machine learning part, data science part, very interestingly comes in from astrophysics. So there's an astrophysicist named Alex Soleil, who is a professor of astronomy at Johns Hopkins, and so he started collaborating with Janice Taubey in the pathology department. And there's a lot of, they started discussing what some of the natural overlaps are between looking at telescope image data, which the large high resolution telescopes such as Hubble generate huge amounts of data. So number one, big data technologies to move around petabytes plus of data have been developed to share them. And then number two, just looking at a map, using machine learning based algorithms to look at a star map and kind of identify galaxies or planets or, stars or whatever. It's not that different than training a machine learning algorithm to look at a digital pathology slide with multiplexed immunofluorescence staining and pick out, to auto select the different, to annotate it basically in a scalable, automated basis, because that's one of the bottlenecks that we have in terms of generating enough data to be able to do more sophisticated advanced analytics and data science and AI on, is to take the slides that we've already taken over the years that are stored in collections and not just digitize them, but once they're digitized, how do you annotate them, right? You don't just have you can't just conjure up a million pathologists to hand annotate all these different images, right? So you have to come up with a way to scale that. And so taking the cues from astronomy and data science and image processing and applying them to multiplex immunofluorescence is a basis of part of what's going on at Johns Hopkins. And that's nice interdisciplinary collaboration, which we then further extended to single cell sequencing. And so Drew Pardol's team there that's looking at, from an immunology perspective, generating a ton of single cell level data. And what does that mean? How can those data be integrated in a meaningful way with the pathology data and other data sets to try to really leverage data science and advanced analytics to come up with better biomarkers for response to checkpoint inhibitor therapy, to try to identify new targets and new populations that will respond to existing therapies. So it's a very important area of research, and really, so we love the interdisciplinary nature of that.
It's exciting work. Ray, you've been just a tremendous leader at the AACR for many years. You've been the president of AACR. You were the president and chairman of the AACR Foundation. You still are very involved in the organization. Talk to us a little bit about what AACR means to you and the important role that you believe AACR plays in this big world that we all kind of live in here.
Yeah, that world of cancer research. Well,
Yes.
AACR was really something that I joined early on in my career, just after I finished my training at Hopkins when I moved to my first faculty position at Vanderbilt. And just by joining the organization, I got introduced to all the meetings and publications that the society does. And, that really gave me a direct connection to everything that was going on research-wise, and then also enabled me to develop a network when you do go to meetings and meet other individuals that can help with collaborations, career development and other things. So as I got more involved, my first committee was the membership committee. I think Marge felt like it would be hard for me to screw that up. So I started off on that one. And basically, we took almost all the members that applied, unless they were in jail or something. And then, I moved up the ladder, became a member of the board of directors, and then eventually the president. And then, took on a leadership position in the foundation. And that just expanded enormously globally, with global membership. And it's just been a really fun ride. I think it really has added a tremendous amount to my career. and expanded my network just tremendously. I mean, one of the things I'm doing now is they have asked me or had asked me to be the chair of the scientific advisory committee for the German National Cancer Center in Heidelberg. And I think mainly because of my exposure in AACR and those leadership positions, they were willing to take a chance on me. And that's really given me a whole bird's eye view on some aspects of the European cancer situation and global aspects of cancer research. And, one thing has just led to the other, and it's just expanded upon itself.
Well, we appreciate everything you've done, and you've been a remarkable leader and mentor to me. And I appreciate the time that you've given us. And Ryan, we've been working with you now for a number of years. We really appreciate the generosity of the Mark Foundation, but we're also now trying to get you a little more involved in some committees and some efforts and activities. And you've been to some meetings and our meetings and that type of thing. Just kind of curious about your exposure to AACR and your thoughts about the organization.
Yeah, so I started to go. I've obviously knew about AACR for a long time when I was in industry, but really taking this role, this is my first kind of non-industry role that's fully in cancer. So 7 years ago, when I came to the Mark Foundation, I really got deeply engaged with AACR. Right, I started coming to all the meetings. Not just the annual meeting is a big deal, but also I'll give one example. In 2018, one of the reasons why I came to the foundation was bringing my background in data science and AI. I went to an AACR sponsored meeting on AI and cancer research that had a tremendous lineup. But one of the speakers there, I believe, was Stephen Friend, who I went up and we were he had just come from Apple, where he was kind of helping lead their wearables division. So we were talking about digital and how digital, either apps or wearables are going to play a role in cancer research. And we ended up, the very first Mark Foundation workshop happened at Carnegie Mellon University, where they have a great machine learning department, a great science department too. And we brought some cancer research folks there. And so just the next year in 2019, and Stephen was the keynote kind of chair at that workshop, who I'd been at AACR. So really, from the very beginning, participating in AACR events helped the Mark Foundation kind of grow our network and plug into a larger global network of important cancer research and just stay on top of things. So I'm looking forward to continuing to do more with AACR and topics that remain really close to me and to the Mark Foundation in data science, chemistry. My first AACR meeting, one more small anecdote, was the Chicago 2018 meeting, I believe. And the very first session I went to was like 8:00 in the morning on Friday or something, was the chemistry and cancer research session. And it was great for me to kind of feel like I had like a home of all these other chemists in the room. And we met, and some of whom later applied to our grants and became grantees, members of our scientific advisory committee. As we embraced, it was exciting for me to see what other chemists were also excited about cancer research. And I think that's an area, Mitch, that we've talked about, where the Mark Foundation and AACR can continue to work together going forward, just to really encourage, chemists, chemical biologists, biochemists to really take a look at, ways to apply their platforms, their ideas, and their research approaches to important cancer problems.
Well, listen, we so appreciate the work that the Mark Foundation does. You guys are really making a significant impact, and we're happy to be playing a small part in that, and collaborating and working with you, and thinking about really important things that we can do to make an impact on our missions. I really, really appreciate your time today. You both are good friends, and you're professional friends, but you're friends, and you mean a lot to us, and really appreciate your spending some time with us today on Believe in Progress. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Mitch. I've enjoyed it, and we'll continue to work together moving forward. There's some big things on our plate coming up, and we're real excited about that.
Yeah, Mitch, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting us. It's been a lot of fun to have this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Raymond DuBois and Dr. Ryan Schoenfeld, for sharing your insights and the impactful work of the Mark Foundation for Cancer Research. To our listeners, today's discussion highlights the critical role of innovative research and global collaboration in advancing cancer treatment. For more information about the Mark Foundation and how you can support their mission, please check our show notes for more information. Remember, progress in cancer research relies on the collective efforts of dedicated individuals like you, our loyal listener, and the organizations like the Mark Foundation. Thank you for tuning in to Believe in Progress podcast. Let's continue to support and inspire one another in our shared mission to fight cancer. You can support life-saving cancer research with any donation you make today. Until next time, keep believing in progress and the difference we can make together. Thank you for listening to Believe in Progress, the AACR Foundation podcast. This podcast is produced by CollegeCast LLC. Please visit www.collegecastpodcast.com for more information.